So today's DH colloquium is by Barbara McGillivray on publishing data papers in the humanities, my experience from the Journal of Open Humanities Data. And Barbara is a lecturer in digital humanities and cultural computation at King's College in London, where she leads the computational humanities research group and a Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, where she runs the Humanities and Data Science Special Interest Group. She's also the president of the ACL Special Interest Group on Language Technologies for the Social, Economic Sciences and Humanities. And she has a degree in mathematics and in classics from the University of Firenze and a PhD in computational linguistics from the University of Pisa. So between 2011 and 2016, she worked in academic publishing. That's also, I think, why we're getting this presentation here. First as a language technologist in the dictionary division of Oxford University Press, and then as a data scientist in the open research group of Springer Nature. She is passionate about supporting open data and humanities research and has been editor-in-chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data since 2019. Her most recent book is Applying Language Technology in Humanities Research, Design, Application, and the Underlying Logic. That's published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2020. Okay, thank you, Barbara, for being here, for being willing to give this presentation. I will now stop my share and then you can take over from here. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm excited to be talking about the journal today. As Manu said, my day job is really as a lecturer in digital humanities, and I do my own research in computational linguistics for historical texts. But today, I'm really going to wear my hat as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Open Humanities Data and share my experience. So hopefully this talk is going to be of interest to a very broad audience across the digital humanities, people working on a range of topics. Right, let me share my screen. And, okay, so my slides should be full screen now.
Yeah, that looks good.
Great, yes. So here's my talk. And I'm going to start by introducing the Journal of Open Humanities Data, which was launched before my time in 2015. So this was an effort by the publisher, Ubiquity Press, which has recently been acquired by De Gruyter. So this publisher wanted to launch a series of what they called meta-journals. And these are innovative journals that, unlike traditional journals, focused on the non-traditional or non-canonical research outputs like research data or software or hardware. So there's a range of code journals and data journals in particular. And this was, I think, a very wise decision, because it was really tapping into an area that was emerging and since then has sort of established itself a bit more. So the Journal of Open Humanities Data is a data journal. What is a data journal? Well, it's a journal that publishes data papers, and those are basically papers that complement traditional research papers. And we'll see the details later on, but just so that we're on the same page in terms of terminology. So the vision of the journal, when I kind of took it over, defined it, was not just to publish papers, but was to really be a key part of what we think is a thriving community of scholars sharing humanities data. So this vision statement contains some of the keywords that are really kind of at the core of what we're trying to do. So very quickly realized that when you lead a journal that isn't established, and even the concept of the type of journal you're running is not particularly familiar to people, it's not enough to just run it as business as usual, need to really make an effort to convey the message. And the message here is around sharing humanities data. So encouraging people to make sharing of humanities data a normal, regular part of their research process. And to do that, there's an important element of community, because often those who are sharing their data, I sometimes feel, or they often feel like they are going against the stream in some way, and kind of really making an extra effort that is not always recognized. So it's important to really acknowledge all of this, and kind of making this effort worthwhile, and sharing experience, and sharing kind of improving the visibility of these people and building the communities is, in my opinion, a very important part of making this into a success. So I'd like to, since I'm a linguist by background, I'd like to parse this phrase, Open Humanities Data, because it is a journal of Open Humanities Data, but you could read the title of the journal in different ways. You could focus on humanities data, and then add open as a kind of attribute to it. So when we talk about humanities data, what do we mean? I mean, the humanities is such a broad field, a range of fields, encompasses so many different backgrounds. And of course, the humanities in general have produced and collected data for centuries. This is not new. Thinking of libraries, and thinking of how texts have been transmitted over centuries. This is all thanks to the effort of actually kind of keeping, producing, collecting these materials. But what is different now, or has been different for a few decades, is of course the large-scale, mass-scale digitization projects that have led to a lot of this data being available digitally. And what this has meant is that this has opened up, as we all know, being digital humanists, a range of new opportunities for accessing and analyzing this data. And of course, the word data itself is not necessarily one that everyone uses. Different disciplines may prefer other words. I mean, being a linguist, you'd think of corpora as one of the primary sources of evidence. But if you're more of a social scientist, you may think of survey data, for example, questionnaires. You may think of maps, audiovisual images, moving images, still images, databases, structured, unstructured, archive, dataset archives, collections, if you're from the library sector. So all of these terms capture the specific communities that work with those objects, those research objects. And so in what I'll cover today, I consider all this as data sets, even though the preference of individuals may differ. And that's actually one of the things that we recognize could be an obstacle to the wider adoption of sharing practices for data in the humanities. The idea that every discipline has different terminologies and may not even conceive of what they do as working with data. So there could be also a little bit of a stigma around the word itself, even though thinking that it comes from Latin is maybe something we like kind of softens the stigma and gives it a historical depth. And I'll show you later on what we try to do for that. So we like to think that we are different from the sciences often, and it is true that data journals have been they started in a scientific context for scientific disciplines. And one could argue that there is something special about humanities. Obviously, every person from their own field will say that their own field is special. But, you know, thinking of humanities data, at least three main characteristics just come to my mind. I'm sure you can think of many more. The idea that a lot of the time, these data sets are the result of manual curation, very long, sometimes long and painful, time-consuming process. There's that goes on in enriching these data or correcting or interpreting this data. And so that's also part of why many people feel so attached to the data, and it can be also an obstacle to sharing it more widely, because there is really so much work that goes into this. Of course, there are automatic processes, algorithms, and computational methods that allow us to collect data at a very large scale. But a lot of the data sets we deal with are small scale, but really, really very rich. There's also kind of an element of subjective or personal individual interpretation that, because it's not arbitrary, it follows the standards, the consensus in the field, but that really can add that human element to the data set. So it often is the case that with humanities data sets, they're unique, and they can't be completely reproduced automatically, computationally. And there's, of course, huge importance given to the context. That's true for any data set, but in particular, when thinking about the type of data sets that are of interest to many humanists, they tend to be placed in a context that needs full account. So what I'm thinking of is, for example, historical data sets where we have an element of historical context, so the time in which the data were produced, or the original texts were produced, for example, the broadly intended historical context. But it's also the context of the specific project, and what was the aim of the project, what was the situation in which the data set itself was created, and that needs to be taken into account, because it determines to some extent what the data looked like in the end, and how it can be reused. Right, but we can also parse the open humanities data phrase as being data about open humanities, or from the open humanities. So I'd like to say a few words about this, because I think it's an interesting and equally valid way of parsing and conceptualizing this phrase, and therefore the role of the journal. So what are the open humanities? Well, again, here we have to refer to the sciences, where the term open science is quite established, to refer to the efforts on making the output of publicly funded research more widely accessible. This is the definition that I took from 2015. And increasingly, open science is replaced by open research to be more inclusive and cover non-scientific and non-STEM disciplines. So where does open humanities fit in this context? Well, there isn't really anything specific about the sciences that makes them, special in terms of open practices. Humanities could equally adopt them, and in this context, then, if we wanted to think of the importance of opening up the research practices, we need to imagine the importance, or the recognized importance of contextualizing every research output that we're producing. So, of course, research papers should be published open access, but data are equally important as research outputs. And one obvious way to do that is to make the data set openly available in a data repository. And so Zenodo is one example. There are many more, Dataverse, Figshare, etc. And what these repositories do is they assign DOI, a digital object identifier, to the data set, and they make the data set itself citable. So there isn't really any need for any kind of humanly readable text that accompanies the data set. And there's also no kind of peer review process in just depositing the data in the repository. So that's where the data paper comes in. It provides the contextualization, the human readable contextualization of the data set that helps other scholars to understand the data, where it came from, how it was created, and then how it can be best reused. And there's also, of course, peer review process. So data papers are peer reviewed, which means that the final output is a paper that gives academic credit to the author. So the data paper describes a data set that needs to be openly available in a repository, but adds this element of contextualization, peer review, and academic credit that really makes the work shine and gives it like the seal of quality. This is an example from linguistics to give you an idea of what the concept of data paper might look like, because it's my own research from before I became editor-in-chief of the journal. So this was the traditional research. So together with Gant Jenset and Michael Rundle, we did a study on from the spoken British National Corpus that was released a few years ago. So we published a chapter in this book. Okay, so far so good. We're all familiar with this concept. We did a lot of work, and then we wrote up the paper on the chapter in this case. But what we decided to do, this is what the chapter looks like. It's a lot of prose, of course, looking into the specifics. What we decided to do was to deposit the data set in a repository. In this case, we chose Figshare. So we opened up the kind of background or kind of the underlying data that we had used and produced as part of this project. So what we had done was we'd taken the British National Corpus and we added some extra annotation. So we were interested in dative alternation. So basically verbs like give and constructions like I give you the book or I give the book to you. And so we analyzed what was the semantics of the person receiving the book in this case, or the thing being given. And so we added this extra information. And so we thought, well, maybe others will benefit from accessing this annotation, because the corpus itself did not have that. Well, it had some level of semantic information, but not at this level of detail. And then we published a data paper to make this data set actually more easily reused and documented and human readable, so to speak, contextualized and peer reviewed. Yeah, so this is what the data paper looks like. It describes where the data deposited, the context, methods for creating the data, and then what it actually looks like when you open it, which fields it has, who created it, and when it was created. Yeah, here you can see the type of information that the data set contains. And then it has a section called reuse potential, which describes how this data set particularly and articulates how it could be reused by others. And so that's basically the concept of data paper that JODH adopts. So I'll talk about the journal now. So we have a team that has been growing quite a lot. The beginning was just me. That was 4 years ago. And now we have 10 members of the editorial board, and we have a growing team of with associate editors, social media editors, editorial assistants, and copy editors. We all volunteers. We all like academics that give that time to the journal as a way to gain experience and improve our visibility and contribute to the community. There's a skew towards linguists in the team due to my network, but we also have classicists, law researchers, and more. And specifically with the journal, decided to split the type of papers that it publishes in two types. One is a straightforward data paper. We call it short data paper, and it's really short, 1,000 words maximum. It describes the data set as I showed you earlier. It is very structured. It says, this is a data set, this is a DOI for it, this is who is created it, etc., etc. And then we realized that authors may also need a bit more space to discuss and articulate more kind of broader questions around humanities data. So we created this type of paper called full-length research papers. They're still data focused, a bit longer, up to 5,000 words. And they are less structured because they look a bit more like a research paper, but they are dedicated to issues around, for example, what it means to access certain type of particularly challenging data set, or previous issues around releasing data sets and so on. So they're a bit more like a meta level. This has been, we published 83 papers so far. I think that we published quite a few more, so need to update that number, but that's the order of magnitude. So the other journal that exists in this space is called Research Data Journal in Humanities and Social Sciences. So it has that social sciences element in addition to humanities, and it's a journal published by Brill. I actually published a data paper on it as my first data paper. And so we did a comparison between these two, because these are the only data journals that are specifically about the humanities, and in RDJ's case, also social sciences, and they are multidisciplinary. They're also data journals that are specifically dedicated to a specific humanities discipline, like we have an Open Archaeology Data Journal, for example. There are also journals that do also publish data papers, but they don't just publish data papers. But these are the ones that, are directly comparable. And this is a graph that shows publications up until June last year. So you see the drop, it's because they only had half of the data for that year. And you can see that they were, comparable in size, but in recent years, JODH has grown quite a lot, and I put a lot of effort into this, and it seems to be paying off. That's so we've done a bit of work on sort of scoping the workflow, making it clear for authors what's going to happen. It's nothing particularly surprising, but there are a few steps that are unique to a data journal. So what needs to happen, first of all, is that the data is deposited in a public open repository. That's the first step, because any data paper needs to have a DOI that refers to the data set. And then there are templates for both types of papers we publish, so those can be, it should be easy to follow. And then the paper gets submitted and it goes through peer review. And then we have in-house copy editors and then typesetting, and it's published. So overall, we try to publish papers in 4 months since submission. It's quite challenging to do that. So because it's sometimes quite hard to find reviewers that are kind of experts in that field, but we recognize that the journal itself does not have an impact factor, is not yet very established. So we want to make it a good choice for people. So, and we also recognize that when people decide to share their data, they're keen to do that quickly, and so that's why we make a particular effort into speeding up the process. We have a list of repositories that for data sets that we recommend, but this is not an exclusive list. And then we also decided to have special collections. It's something I realized was quite important when the journal like JODH, Journal of Open Humanities Data, has such a broad scope. It means that it aids or speaks to so many different communities of humanists that sometimes can feel a bit like a dispersion of attention, so to speak, and focus. So I reached out to experts in particular fields for editing, guest editing special collections. This is what you'd imagine calling a special issue in a traditional journal, but we don't have issues. We publish on a rolling basis, so we call these special collections. So we have one on derived from the Digital Humanities at Oxford Summer School. There's what is on new perspective and processes in digital humanities data, one about COVID-19 humanities data, one on language documentation, and one from the computational humanities research workshop in 2020. And we have a couple of more in preparation. So these are special collections that, as I said, edited by guest editors, and they exist alongside the general issue, general collection. So anyone can submit to the general issue at any point. If it doesn't fit any of the collections. In terms of disciplinary scope, we did an analysis to compare JODH and RDJ, the other journal, and could see that there is a little bit of overlap, but also quite a bit of difference. And JODH is more focused on traditionally humanities disciplines, whereas RDJ has, of course, more of the social sciences, and also history, which, according to some, could be considered a social science, some humanities. Yeah, and in JODH, there's a lot of linguistics. I don't know if me being there kind of plays a role in this. But yeah, so you see the two journals kind of can happily coexist because they sort of seem to, yeah, to kind of publish slightly different content. What we're trying to do as part of being active and reaching out to the communities, taking part in different events, like LIBE event for libraries, been invited to speak at different roundtables and panels. There's also presentation at the DASA conference 2021, various ones, SciDataCon last year. Yeah. This list is not exhaustive. We try to give talks quite regularly to really improve the awareness of people towards this journal. Still kind of niche journal. Not many people know about. We also wanted to tackle this question of stigma towards the word data. So I thought this would be something that could hold people back. So I asked the social media editors of the journal to run this campaign that we called #ShowMeYourData, where we asked, they asked authors of JODH articles to post a screenshot, an image, something visual to represent the data that they described in their data paper. And then we retweeted it, and we sort of want to really to give a concrete idea of what this data set looks like. And you see a big variety of data sets, from a spreadsheet to an archive, anything in between. And yeah, this has had quite a lot of success. It really has helped also the journal's Twitter profile, and it, well, more importantly, I hope it has really helped to kind of destroy a little bit of this stigma around calling what you do data. And then we've done other activities. We organized some Open Humanities Data Forum events, and we have a YouTube channel where we put videos of those events, various events we organized. So I invite you to check it out. And then we've done some actual research ourselves. So none of us are bibliometric specialists, but I have worked in academic publishing, and so I've published some articles on looking at scientific articles in general. And so we published a paper on the Journal of Open Humanities Data, and then one on the impact of data papers and data sets in humanities. So this is what I'm going to briefly show you to close this talk. So it's a second paper you see here, was published last year in the journal called Publications. So what we did is we wanted to see to what extent data papers actually help the visibility of research broadly. So we conceived what we call this golden triangle of including the research paper, that's a traditional one. That's where you describe your own research. That's the traditional chapter or paper. You have the data set that's the data set that you collected to do the study, or you collected as part of doing the study. Maybe you added some extra annotation. And so you have the data set in a repository. Then you have ideally the data paper that describes the data set. So you have these three elements that kind of help each other and contribute to describing, and exhaustively your research. And so they all complement each other. So what we wanted to do is to measure to what extent the research papers they had a data paper associated with them as sort of more successful or at least more cited, and whether also data sets that had a data paper associated with them also more reviewed. So we had these different metrics: citations, downloads, views. So here are two plots that show, as analysis that Nilo Pedrazzini did, show the citations of research papers that had an associated data paper. So we manually created this link where we went through all the data papers published in JODH and RDJ and found which research papers they're sort of associated with in terms of having the same research study behind them. And so those are the research papers that have this is data paper associated. And then on the right, you see, of the left plot, you see all research papers in the humanities and social sciences that we took from a big database of scientific publications. So you see that with respect to the general research papers, the ones that have a data paper associated with them seem to be better in terms of citations, even though of course there's variability and there's confidence interval. And then when it comes to research papers, this is the alt metric. So the one on the right does not look at citations, but looks at what we call altmetric scores. So those are things like tweets and Facebook likes. So it's kind of alternative metric. And again, you see research papers that have a data paper associated with them have higher altmetric scores. So, and then when it comes to the data sets, what we did is looked at the data sets that are described in data papers published in JODH and RDJ versus all data sets have been deposited in Zenodo that are labeled as humanities and social sciences. And so we see again that data sets with the data paper associated with them have more downloads and more views. This effect is stronger than for the previous one. So overall, there seems to be really a positive impact in terms of having data papers, both associated with data sets and associated research papers, which was encouraging because it helps make a case for publishing in a data journal. And we have a Twitter account. So we have different hashtags for different activities we do. We have a newsletter you can subscribe to. We have a YouTube channel. There's always to keep in touch. And that's everything from me. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Barbara. This was really interesting. I have a few questions. I also see there's a question in the chat. I quickly want to make a few comments to make it a little bit more specific to South Africa. So one is, that's a very important one for researchers in South Africa. JODH is actually an accredited journal in South Africa, so you didn't explicitly mention that. So publications in the journal are actually considered accredited publications. So that's really nice. One of the questions I had, and then we'll quickly go to Tanya's question, but this is also more of a comment now because you already gave a few suggestions for the different repositories that people can use, right, to put their data data sets on. I quickly want to mention that Sadler also has a repository where people can submit their data, mostly related to linguistics. So that might be a very nice option for South Africa as well. And one quick last comment. We're currently, you mentioned the DASA conference of 2021, and you were involved there as well. We just started organizing the next DASA conference, which will take place at the end of this year. And now I will shut up with my comments, and let's just go to the question. So Tanya has a question. How do you distinguish data papers from research papers? Do you have guidelines for authors to help them with the distinction?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. So I assume you're referring to what we call full-length research papers, which are still sort of data-focused papers that we publish. Yes, okay. So the advice that I tend to give when people ask me is, well, first of all, it's a length. If you feel like 1,000 words isn't going to be enough, then you probably want a research paper. But more importantly, it is about whether your paper is of a specific data set you're just aiming to describe, or whether it is a broader discussion of some general issues around data. So sometimes you can find the cases that fall in between these two extremes. So we've also published what we call research papers that are really data papers, but they were just so detailed and so rich that they just could not fit in 1,000 words, and we just didn't want to kind of miss the opportunity to have that paper. But more generally, it's about whether you have some experience that you want to share, some reflection, some general framework that sort of goes beyond a specific data set. In that case, I would recommend a full-length research paper. So we've had research papers published about the open science framework in France, or about issues around access of data sets. So I invite you to have a look at on our website. There's a content section where you can see them and have a sense. But yeah, that's a general rule. So if it is really just description of a specific data set, then that's probably a short data paper. It's more like something that is bigger, but that wouldn't really fit in any other journal because it's too specific to data. then it's a good fit for us. Hope this helps. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Hope that answers your question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that sounds good. I'm not sure if there are any other questions from the audience.
I could also say, while people think about their questions, that in relation to the Sadler repository, if it is open to everyone, I mean, we could also add it to our list of recommended repositories. We're happy to do that one as long as the repository assigns a DOI and it's well recognized in the community. We don't have any kind of strict requirement about where people need to deposit data, and we are happy to add descriptions of repositories to just help the visibility. So this is something.
Okay, no, that sounds great. We need to talk about that. I see there's a question in the chat. I assume all data sets should have ethical clearance of some sort.
Right. Okay. So we get into the very important question of where does the sort of assessment of the data stop, and where does the assessment of the data paper stop. So we as a journal fully review the data papers, and by that we also mean making sure that there is ethical clearance. When it comes to the process that led to the creation of the data and also the quality of the data set, we don't ask our reviewers to do a full assessment of that, and we can expect authors to have cleared any ethical concerns around the data. And that's because there is just no capacity for doing the full check on the data for our side. So we don't publish the data, we publish the data. So yeah, so the just short answer is yes, authors are expected to have cleared any ethical issues on the data, and so they're allowed to share the data openly, and then the data paper can be written. Yeah, hope that we.
Yes, so I think the thing is, you're not publishing the data sets themselves, right? You're only publishing the description of it. So
yeah, exactly. We don't take the responsibility on the data. It's just on the text, on the data paper. Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. While people are writing their questions, I have a few questions. So one thing I really wondered. So when you looked at that, what did you call it, the golden triangle, or these kind of three triangle things, how do people use their data papers? So I think you can see it in different kind of orders, right? So on the one hand, you can do your research, you publish your research, and then you realize, oh, I actually have a data set. I can write one of these data papers. Or you can kind of turn it around and you write your data paper first. And then when you describe your research, you can actually refer back to your data paper. Perhaps there might be other kind of situations as well. So what is it what is it people do? What is it you recommend?
Totally, yes, and thanks. Excellent question. I do have a qualitative answer and I have a quantitative answer as well. So I'll start with the qualitative one. Anecdotally, yeah, I've seen also the kinds of scenarios. Sometimes people are hesitant and they don't want to publish the data paper before they publish the research paper, because the research paper sometimes is in a higher prestige venue, and they feel that by publishing data paper first, they're sort of spoiling and almost damaging themselves. I think that's a false sentiment, but it's one that is strong, because there is still a lot of kind of feeling of being protective of your own data, especially in the humanities, when this practice isn't so common, and you want to feel quite defensive about this. So some people wait until the research paper is out and then they publish the data paper. But the natural order would be to publish the data paper first, because first of all, it tends to take much faster than a traditional journal. We have short articles, and I am quite really proactive in trying to really get the reviews quickly. So it makes sense to make your data and the data paper associated available first. But what the quantitative answer is from the paper that I described earlier. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So this is a paper I mentioned, this deep impact paper. You see it here, yeah. And so we did an analysis of the timing of publications. So let me see if I can find it. Okay, yeah, okay, this is number of days. Make it a bit bigger. If I can. Oh, okay. Yeah, number of days between the publication of a data set in a public repository and publication of the associated data paper. So you see here days before or after dataset publication. And so you can see that you see some negative numbers. So that means that the data paper was published before the data set, but that's quite a few because it should not quite happen. And then you have the majority where the data set's published first, and then here you have the research paper and data paper. So here you have more of a spread, and that's what we discussed just now, with some people publishing the data paper before and some after. So we comment on all these. We look at median. So the average data paper is published after the research paper, with a median of 136 6 days. So you can look at all the details. It's the open access paper. But yeah, it's interesting. It shows the kind of what goes in people's minds and sort of in their own research process.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks.
Long answer.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting also if you have a data set and you're working on that research, you know, what makes sense, what gives the biggest impact. Should you aim to kind of get them published as close as possible together, or do you spread this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a practical element that you would want to have the citation in one of them, and typically you'd want the citation to your data paper in your research paper, because you'd say, this is our study, and by the way, the data can be found here, and this is the data paper that describes the data. And here's what we found. So you're able to do that if you've published the data paper first.
Yeah.
But I can see reasons for doing it the other way around. And legitimate.
Not sure if there are any more questions from the audience. I see the chat is relatively quiet. So I also wondered, what is the relationship between the journal, the articles, especially the data articles published in the journal, and something like a conference like LREC? So LREC, I think, now also have this language resource and evaluation journal. Yeah. So how does that relate?
Yeah, so I must say linguistics is a field where sort of I think we're ahead of other fields in terms of giving credit to resource creation. And so to the extent that we have conferences and journals dedicated to that. I guess the difference is that JODH reaches a much broader audience. The LREC and LRE are really aimed at an audience of linguists only. Yeah, I guess JODH articles are they're quicker to write. They are in a way less detailed. We don't focus as much on the evaluation side. So I would say they're not directly comparable because JODH is really publishes data papers, whereas LRE, you could argue they are research, sort of more traditional research papers. But there's definitely kind of some overlap. So you might have an open question whether to publish in one or the other, and in that case, could be more of a pragmatic decision. Well, JODH tends to publish quicker, but would publish shorter papers. And
that's really the trade-off.
The audience.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful, thanks. I'm not sure if there are any other questions.
And I mean, I guess another question is that we require the data to be open, whereas LRE, yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure. I don't see any other questions. Barbara, we've talked before as well, so it's I've already asked my large question. I'm kind of rethinking, what were the questions that we discussed last time. Yeah, so Tanya says thanks.
Yeah,
I think it is exactly. I think it is a really nice journal, and I think it's also very relevant to the work in digital humanities that we're doing. We really want to share the data so people can reuse it. So there are often a lot of other questions you can ask if you have access to the data set and if you know what's in the data set. I mean, I remember looking at other data sets, and if there's no description, sometimes you have no clue what it all means. So having that description is just really, really nice. So that's why I thought it would be wonderful if you could give a presentation on the journal. So thank you for that. I think if there are no more questions, then we'll leave it here. Just quickly checking, give one more opportunity. Okay, Michelle also says thanks. And I would also like to thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Really nice presentation, and I hope that we get a lot of people publishing in JODH now, and of course submitting all their data sets to the Saddler repository. or any other repositories, so that we can actually start reusing data more and more. Great, thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you. And yeah, good luck with organizing DASA. And yeah, I hope to see you around. I'm going to be at JODH 2023 in Graz, if anyone is also coming. But otherwise, yeah, hope to see you in some other venue.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.